All right, folks, settle in, pull up a comfy chair, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea. Let's have a little chat, shall we? Now, for most of our lives, the idea that we might not be the only ones out here, well, it's been something relegated to the realms of science fiction, hasn't it? Something you might ponder on a quiet evening, maybe after watching a good movie with spaceships and little green men. It's been the stuff of myths, the fuel for religious beliefs, and certainly a wellspring for countless tales spun around campfires and in the pages of dog-eared paperbacks. We've wondered, we've speculated, we've looked up at those twinkling stars on a clear night and maybe, just maybe, let our imaginations wander to the possibility of other civilizations, other beings, perhaps even something beyond our wildest comprehension. For generations, that's largely where it stayed. A fascinating what if, a subject for friendly debate, but never something we could quite put our finger on. But you know, things have been shifting lately, haven't they? A subtle breeze of change has started to rustle through the long-held certainties. Over the past few years, a small but persistent group of folks have started to push the notion that there's more to this cosmic tapestry than meets the eye. These weren't just wide-eyed dreamers either. We're talking about individuals who've held positions of trust, people who've served our country, folks who've been privy to information the rest of us could only guess at. For years, the government, well, let's just say they've been accused of keeping a pretty tight lid on things, haven't they? Accusations of cover-ups, of sweeping things under the rug. They've been floating around for decades. Then, almost unexpectedly, the dam started to crack. We began to see drips, then trickles, and finally, a steady stream of admissions. High-ranking officials, decorated pilots who've soared through our skies protecting our freedoms, even intelligence insiders, people who've operated in the shadows dealing with the most sensitive information imaginable, they started stepping forward. And what they were talking about wasn't your run-of-the-mill odd light in the sky that turned out to be swamp gas or a mistaken weather balloon caught in the jet stream. No, sir, they were talking about something altogether different. They were describing technology that seemed to laugh in the face of everything we thought we knew about physics. Maneuvers that defied gravity as we understand it, speeds that would make our most advanced aircraft look like they were standing still, and shapes and forms that simply shouldn't be possible according to our current understanding of engineering and aerodynamics. And that's when the real questions started to take center stage, didn't they? It wasn't just about figuring out what these things were. Were they some kind of secret military project so advanced that even most of the military didn't know about it? Were they natural phenomena that we just hadn't quite grasped yet? Or, and this is the big one, were they something else? Something from beyond our world? And if they were, then the next logical and frankly, rather mind-boggling question was, who or what was behind them? What kind of beings could pilot such craft? What were their intentions? Were they friend, foe, or something so alien that those concepts wouldn't even apply? For so long, a veil of secrecy, a culture of don't ask, don't tell, seemed to have kept the truth, whatever that truth might be, buried deep beneath layers of classification and official denial. But now, with each leak of information, each document that gets declassified and sees the light of day, each carefully worded public statement from those who've been on the inside, within the system, that truth, like a persistent weed pushing through cracked pavement, is slowly but surely claiming its way to the surface. It's a fascinating time, isn't it? A time when long-held assumptions are being challenged and the possibility of something truly extraordinary feels a little less like science fiction and a little more, well, like something we might actually have to confront. Now, when you boil it all down, when you sift through the reports and the testimonies, the grainy videos and the sometimes conflicting accounts, there really only seem to be a handful of possibilities, don't there? We have to consider all angles, no matter how strange they might sound at first. First, there's the possibility, however improbable it might seem, given some of the descriptions we've heard, that what has been reported by countless pilots, by seasoned members of militaries all around the globe, these trained observers who are used to identifying aircraft and other aerial phenomena, that what they've been seeing is simply something natural. Maybe it's atmospheric conditions we don't fully understand, or some kind of optical illusion that can fool even the most experienced eyes. Perhaps there are meteorological events that can produce lights and shapes in the sky that mimic advanced technology. It seems a stretch, especially when you hear about the impossible maneuvers. But we have to keep an open mind to all possibilities, no matter how mundane they might seem compared to the more exciting explanations. Secondly, we have to consider the possibility that this is man-made technology. Think about it for a second. We live in a world where technological advancements are happening at an astonishing pace. What was considered science fiction just a few decades ago is now commonplace. Could it be that some nation, perhaps our own or maybe a foreign power, has developed technology that is so mind-blowingly advanced that it appears to defy the laws of physics as we currently understand them? And if that were the case, why wouldn't they own up to it? Maybe it's being kept secret for national security reasons, a strategic advantage that no one wants to reveal. Or perhaps, and this is a more unsettling thought, maybe this technology is so far ahead of what is publicly known that even the creators are hesitant to reveal its full capabilities. It's a chilling thought, isn't it, to consider that there might be technologies out there that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the world, technologies that we, the general public, have absolutely no idea even exist. But then there's the third option, the one that really gets the imagination going, the one that, if true, would change everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. What if everything we've been told, or perhaps haven't been told, was wrong? What if we're standing on the edge of a reality that is far bigger, far more complex, and frankly, far more astonishing than we've ever dared to imagine? What if those lights in the sky, those impossible maneuvers, those strange shapes aren't natural phenomena and aren't secret human technology? What if they are, in fact, evidence of something else? Something from beyond our little blue marble? And if that's the case, are we ready to face it? Are we ready to grapple with the implications of knowing that we are not alone? That there might be other intelligences, other civilizations, perhaps even beings who have mastered technologies that make our own look like Stone Age tools? It's a profound and potentially life-altering question, one that has captivated thinkers and dreamers for centuries. Ever since that groundbreaking story in 2017 by the New York Times, the one that really brought the topic of government knowledge about UFOs back into the mainstream conversation, there has been a huge surge of momentum towards disclosure. We've seen videos being declassified, Videos that once were only seen by a select few within the halls of power, now being released for the public to scrutinize. We've heard continuous and, frankly, sometimes outlandish claims being made by individuals who once held prominent roles within our intelligence services. People who were in positions to know things, to see things that the rest of us could only speculate about. It feels like a subject that needs to be discussed even more openly, even more seriously than it already is. The stigma that has long been attached to this topic seems to be slowly but surely fading away, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity and a demand for answers. Now, I'll be honest with you folks. When I first thought about diving into this whole UFO phenomenon, my initial intention was to put together a serious video. One of those deep dives into some of the more notable cases that have really pushed this disclosure movement forward. Cases with multiple credible witnesses, maybe some compelling photographic or video evidence, the kind of stuff that even the staunchest skeptic might have to pause and consider. But then I had a little thought, a little spark of an idea that sounded, well, a lot more fun. A few episodes back, I asked you all in the comments whether you believed in the paranormal, in ghosts and things that go bump in the night. And it was fascinating to read your responses, the different beliefs and experiences that you all shared. But you know what I realized? I've never actually come right out and asked you a pretty fundamental question in this whole realm of the unexplained. Do you believe in UFOs? And if you do, what do you think they are? Are they extraterrestrial visitors? Are they something else entirely? Something we haven't even conceived of yet? So, here's my little request to you, right here at the beginning of our journey together. Please take a moment and let me know your general thoughts on this topic down in the comments below. It can be as simple as a yes or no to signify whether you believe in UFOs or not. Or, if you're feeling more chatty, share what you think they might be. I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspectives, your theories, your own personal experiences if you have any. This is a conversation, folks, and I want to hear what's on your minds. Because tonight, we're not necessarily going to be focusing on the nuts and bolts of the disclosure movement or the most rigorously documented cases. Instead, we're going to take a little detour down some of the more, shall we say, unconventional paths of UFO lore. We're going to delve into the stranger side of things, the reports that make you scratch your head and maybe even chuckle a little bit. We're going to cover everything from encounters with what have been described as flowery robots, to alleged meetings with aliens who seem to have a penchant for pancakes, and maybe, just maybe, we'll even touch on a sighting or two of a flying Bigfoot. So, get yourself a warm drink, dim the lights a little, settle into your favorite spot, and get comfortable. Because if these stories are anything to go by, things are about to get very, very strange around here. And who knows? Maybe by the end of our little exploration tonight, you'll have a whole new perspective on what might be lurking out there in the vast expanse above us. Let's embark on this journey together, shall we? It's going to be an interesting ride, that's for sure. All right, folks, now that we've set the stage and gotten our imaginations warmed up, let's really dive into some of these truly bizarre encounters, shall we? We're going to start our little journey into the strange with a story that comes to us all the way from the Sunshine State, Florida. Now, Florida is known for a lot of things, isn't it? Sunshine, oranges, beautiful beaches, and, well, maybe a little bit of the strange and unusual from time to time. But this particular story, dating back to 1974, definitely falls into the latter category. Imagine this. The phone starts ringing in the offices of a weekday newspaper. This wasn't one of those big city dailies, mind you, but a local paper based in West Palm Beach, the kind of paper that keeps its finger on the pulse of the community. The receptionist answers, as they do, and on the other end of the line is an older woman. Her voice, perhaps a little hesitant but filled with a sense of urgency, asks to speak to a reporter. She has a story, she says, something strange that happened to her when she was just a young girl, something she's kept bottled up inside for decades. It was an experience, she explains, that she never felt comfortable sharing with anyone. But after all this time, 50 years, can you imagine? She's finally decided that it's important to tell her story, to share what she saw, even if she knows that some folks might not believe her. Now, you can just picture the scene in that newspaper office, can't you? A slow news day. Maybe the reporters are sipping lukewarm coffee and waiting for something interesting to break. And then this call comes in. A woman with a 50-year-old secret? You can bet that piqued someone's interest. Apparently, the folks at the newspaper felt the same way, because they decided to send out a reporter to meet with this woman, whose name was Evelyn Went, and who, at the time of the call, was a manager at a beauty salon. When Evelyn finally laid out her 50-year-old secret to the reporter, well, you can almost imagine the reporter thinking that someone back at the office was playing a prank on him. This had to be a joke, right? But as Evelyn continued with her story, there was something in the way she told it, a certain earnestness, a conviction in her voice that seemed to ring true. Despite how utterly unbelievable the details were, this woman, by all accounts, genuinely believed that this event had really happened to her. She explained that she was around 9 years old at the time of the incident, living in Pasco County, which is just a little north of Tampa. It was a typical childhood day. She was alone, playing outside near her school without a care in the world. And then she noticed something, a light. But this wasn't just any light, not one of those fleeting streaks across the sky that you might mistake for a shooting star or an airplane. No, this light was coming from the ground right there on the lawn, just a few feet away from where she was standing. Evelyn wasn't sure how long it had been there, this strange illumination in the grass, but it certainly had her full attention now. She described it as a small egg-shaped light, nestled right there in the green, glowing with an intensity that was almost blinding. In fact, the light was so bright she believed that it actually rendered her unconscious, at least momentarily. There was a sudden jump in her memory, a blank spot in her recollection of what happened next. The next thing she knew, the object wasn't glowing with that same overpowering intensity. What had been a blinding, glowing egg now looked more like what we've come to know as a traditional flying saucer. Although, of course, back in the early 1920s, when this supposedly happened, remember she was 9 in 1924 and telling the story in 1974, the term flying saucer might not have been quite so traditional. Evelyn noted that the saucer didn't look high-tech or sleek or futuristic, like something out of a movie. If anything, she said, it looked old and beaten up, almost like it had seen better days. The little girl stood there, almost hypnotized by the sight, as she claimed that a hatch on the side of this strange object slowly opened, and that was when she saw them. For the first time, she laid eyes on the occupants of this peculiar craft as they began to walk out of the opening right there in front of her. Now, get this. In Evelyn's own words, she described the scene as follows. Little people emerged. I think they were robots. I tried to count them, but they changed about. She said they were smaller than she was, a little 9-year-old girl, and they resembled animated flowers, with faces where the bud of the flower would be. Remember, she said, she was just a bitty thing then, and kids don't fear flowers. It's a rather innocent and almost whimsical description, isn't it? These flower creatures, as she called them, were carrying some sort of object. She described them as lugging it between them, struggling with it. For some reason, Evelyn got the distinct impression that this object was a weapon of some kind. And what's even stranger, they appeared to be attempting to point this weapon towards the science building of her school, which was nearby. Stranger still, Evelyn felt compelled not to run away, not to scream for help, but instead to assist these strange, animated-looking flower creatures, and apparently the creatures were perfectly happy for her to do so. They didn't seem alarmed by her presence at all, but despite the object they were carrying appearing to be small, Evelyn found that she couldn't move it an inch. She said she was desperate to help them. They seemed so small, so helpless, so innocent in their task. Up until this moment, Evelyn said, the creatures hadn't uttered a single word. But after her attempt to help them move this mysterious object, the beings apparently began to communicate with her. But here's the really odd part. Their mouths didn't seem to move. In fact, she wasn't even sure if they had real mouths at all. Instead, Evelyn could hear their thoughts directly in her mind. It was a telepathic communication, a direct transfer of information from their minds to hers. And what did these flower-like beings communicate? They informed the little girl that there were experiments being carried out in her school's laboratory, dangerous experiments. Experiments, they said, that they had to put a stop to, or else the entire place would be destroyed. Now, Evelyn told the reporter that she had absolutely no idea what these experiments could be. What could possibly have been taking place in a 1920s Florida school that could be seen as so dangerous by these strange visitors? It's a question that hangs in the air, isn't it? What kind of scientific endeavors were underway in a local school that would warrant intervention from what appeared to be extraterrestrial beings? But then, after all this effort of bringing this mysterious machine to the school, nothing happened. Instead, without explaining to Evelyn why, they simply began to pick it back up and return it to their craft. She couldn't say for sure if the machine had done anything, if it had somehow neutralized the supposed dangerous experiments, or if the flower creatures had simply changed their minds. Maybe, she speculated, it was simply a test to see if she, a young human girl, would be willing to help them. After they had returned the object to their saucer, one of the flower beings offered to take Evelyn inside the craft to show it to her. But in what was likely a very sensible reaction for a 9-year-old girl faced with such an unbelievable situation, Evelyn said she didn't want to go inside. Replayed the night's bewildering events in his mind. The same haunting question lingered. What in the world had he stumbled upon out there on that lonely forest road? As soon as his shift finished, the initial fear began to recede, replaced by an overwhelming sense of curiosity. He had to know, or at least try to find out, what he had witnessed. So, against his better judgment perhaps, he returned to the site. The early morning light cast long shadows across the forest as he slowly drove back to the location of his terrifying encounter. He scanned the ground, his eyes searching for any sign, any trace of what he had seen the night before. Burn marks on the asphalt, disturbed earth where the craft had supposedly hovered, broken branches where the ramp had extended. Anything at all that would corroborate the incredible images etched in his memory. But there was nothing. The forest floor looked undisturbed. The roadside was as it should be. It was as if the entire event, the glowing sphere, the strange geometric beings, the mysterious taxi, had been nothing more than a vivid and unsettling fever dream. Except PN knew in his heart that it wasn't a dream. The fear he had felt was too real, the images too sharp, too bizarre to have been conjured up by his subconscious. He kept his secret for years, understandably hesitant to share such an outlandish tale with anyone. He told only his immediate family, perhaps seeking some solace or understanding within the trusted circle of his loved ones. This reluctance to share such extraordinary experiences is a common thread that runs through many of these accounts, isn't it? The fear of ridicule, of being labeled as crazy or a liar, can be a powerful deterrent. It wasn't until 1996, more than a decade after the event, that the truth finally began to surface. His mother, who along with her husband had also apparently experienced a strange encounter involving a UFO stopping their car sometime after PN's sighting, tipped off a Scandinavian UFO information organization known as SUFOI. Now, that's an acronym we'll just have to roll with. 2 investigators from SUFOI were dispatched to the family home. They interviewed PN in depth, patiently listening to his incredible story. They soon discovered that the family apparently had more than just PN's singular experience with the unexplained. And through it all, PN's conviction remained unwavering. He knew what he had seen that night, even if he couldn't fully comprehend what it was. During these interviews, PN also revealed something unexpected, something that added another layer of strangeness to an already bizarre tale. Since that night in 1981, he had developed a kind of precognitive ability. He didn't seem to give the investigators many specific details about how this worked exactly, just the suggestion that on some occasions he was able to see things before they happened. Was there a connection between this newfound ability and his encounter with the strange beings and their craft? He didn't know, and the investigators could only speculate. It's a fascinating and unsettling thought, isn't it? That a close encounter with something unknown could potentially alter one's very perception of time and reality. The SUFOI team, determined to get to the bottom of this compelling report, traveled to the location of the sighting. They retraced PN's steps, examined the roadside and the adjacent forest for themselves, hoping to find any lingering evidence that might have been overlooked. But as PN had described, the passage of time had erased any physical trace of the event. Not that, according to PN, there was much of any trace to begin with. The craft hadn't seemed to leave any lasting marks on the environment. The investigators also attempted to track down any additional witnesses, particularly the unknown taxi driver, whose appearance and strange signaling remained a key part of PN's account. They even placed a personal advertisement in a local newspaper, hoping that the driver or someone who knew them might come forward. But despite their efforts, no one ever did. The mysterious taxi driver remained an enigma, a silent and unexplained element in an already perplexing puzzle. Despite the lack of physical evidence and the inability to locate the taxi driver, both investigators from Sufoy were reportedly convinced that PN's experience was genuine. They couldn't say for certain what he had encountered that night on the forest road, but they believed that he had indeed witnessed something extraordinary. The awesome encounter, as it has come to be known in UFO circles, remains one of the strangest and most well-documented reports of alleged alien beings ever recorded in Scandinavia. Their triangular features, so different from the typical little green men imagery, make this sighting stand out as rather unique to this day. PN's account continues to be regarded as one of Denmark's most compelling and chilling UFO cases. It leaves you with so many unanswered questions, doesn't it? What exactly did PN see that night? Who was in that taxi, and what was the meaning of those flashing headlights? Did the beings ever return to that quiet stretch of road? Perhaps, somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the Danish countryside, those silent, gliding guardians are still watching, their purpose and origins remaining a mystery to us. Okay, folks, we're going to take a little break from our tales of alleged alien encounters for a moment, because if you believe certain stories, there is something else unexplainable flying through our skies. Something perhaps a little more unexpected. I'm talking about the legend, the myth, the sometimes laughable but occasionally unsettling idea of the flying Bigfoot. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Bigfoot? Flying? Isn't that a bit of a stretch? Well, grab your skepticism hats, but hear me out, because there are accounts out there, strange and few though they may be, that suggest this very thing. And our next story takes us to the Pacific Northwest, a region known for its dense forests, its Sasquatch sightings, and apparently, according to one witness, something even more bizarre. It was the summer of 2005, late June to be precise, when an ordinary drive home turned into something utterly extraordinary for one individual. This witness, who has understandably remained nameless, was driving his small Mazda along Highway 12 Northeast from Walla Walla, a town nestled in southeastern Washington state, not too far from the Oregon border. As he was driving, he first caught sight of something unusual out of the corner of his eye. All right, folks, after those rather unconventional tales, we've arrived at our final stop on this journey into the truly strange and unexplained. Our last story takes us to a cold Valentine's Day morning in 1967, down in Tuscumia, Missouri. Now, Missouri is a state known for its down-to-earth folks, its beautiful landscapes, and maybe a little bit of Ozark Mountain mystique. But what happened to one no-nonsense farmer that morning was anything but ordinary. Claude Edwards, a man who likely wasn't prone to flights of fancy, found himself at the center of a very peculiar encounter as he prepared to go about his daily chores. He stepped outside into the crisp morning air and immediately sensed that something was off. The familiar sounds of the farm were absent. The usual chorus of mooing cows, clucking chickens, and whatever other barnyard noises filled his mornings was replaced by an eerie silence. Edward started walking closer and closer to his barn, his senses on high alert. Then he glanced to his right, towards the field next to his property where his cattle were usually grazing. He saw them huddled together in the eastern field, all of them staring intently in the same direction, their gazes fixed on something beyond his barn. Intrigued and perhaps a little uneasy, Edwards followed their gaze, and that's when his eyes landed on an astonishing sight. Sitting in the adjacent meadow, a place where he knew there was nothing out of the ordinary, was a massive object unlike anything he had ever seen before. He described it as mushroom-shaped, a large dome sitting atop a sort of tube-like base. The structure was a dull grayish-green color, blending somewhat with the winter landscape, but undeniably alien in its form. Edwards couldn't look away. He continued towards his barn, his eyes never leaving this strange object in the field. He went about his initial chores, setting down his feed buckets and securing the doors, all the while keeping a wary eye on the peculiar craft. Once those immediate tasks were done, his curiosity, or perhaps a sense of responsibility for his farm, compelled him to turn back towards the object for a closer look. It was then that he noticed them. It wasn't just this weird structure that had appeared in his field. There was something else moving around down there. He saw a group of small figures moving frantically beneath the shadow of the mushroom-shaped object. From his vantage point, roughly 70 feet away, Edwards observed these beings with keen detail. They were short, no taller than about 3 feet, and they shared the same dull grayish-green hue as their craft. What struck Edwards most were their eyes. He described them as large and wide-set, black eyes that, he admitted later, could have been goggles instead of actual eyes, but they gave the beings an unsettling appearance nonetheless. Edwards was also struck by the speed at which these little figures moved. Their lower limbs were obscured from his view, so he didn't get a good look at their legs or feet. But their arms seemed to be flailing around as they worked, making it difficult for him to determine whether they had hands in the traditional sense. He also noticed some dark protrusion jutting out from where their noses and mouths should have been. He speculated that this might have been some kind of breathing apparatus. And then came his now famous description. In what I think is a slightly unusual move for someone witnessing something so extraordinary, but also in some ways understandable given his no-nonsense farmer demeanor, Edwards would later infamously go on to describe these beings as green penguins from outer space. It's a vivid image, isn't it? Perhaps a way for him to process something so utterly outside his frame of reference by comparing them to something familiar, albeit with a decidedly extraterrestrial twist. Now, here's where the story takes another interesting turn, one that speaks to Edwards' character. Instead of being paralyzed by fear or running for cover, this Missouri farmer became, well, irate. These strange penguin people were on his land. These unknown intruders had spooked his cattle and invaded his farm, and he wasn't about to stand idly by and let it happen. Without hesitation, Claude Edwards climbed over the first fence separating his yard from the field. He picked up the biggest rocks he could find. This wasn't a man to go unarmed into a confrontation, even if that confrontation was with alleged space penguins. And then he started marching towards the beings, apparently with the clear intention of throwing rocks at the UFO. Not just to scare them away, mind you, but he later said he wanted to damage it enough so that it couldn't take off. Talk about a determined farmer. As he closed the gap, getting to within just 15 feet of the strange craft and the busy little beings, something inexplicable happened. He hit an invisible wall. There was no tangible barrier, nothing he could see or feel, yet he was completely unable to move forward. He was stopped dead in his tracks by something he couldn't perceive. Now, at this close range, Edwards took in the finer details of the craft. The dome top, he estimated, spanned about 18 feet across, with an apex height of around 8 feet. The hull of the object was metallic, yet it had an oddly soft look to it, almost as if it were crafted from a seamless, futuristic material. Along its surface were evenly spaced out oval cutouts, each about a foot wide, and these cutouts emitted a pulsating, multicolored light, a mesmerizing, shifting glow that illuminated the area around the craft. It wasn't clear to Edwards whether these were windows or some form of illumination, but they certainly added to the otherworldly appearance of the object. After getting a good look at this strange vessel, and still unable to move closer, Edwards retreated a little. Unwilling to simply accept defeat, he hoisted a heavy rock and hurled it toward the craft. The stone struck the unseen force field, ricocheted away harmlessly, and dropped to the ground without a sound. Undeterred, he lobbed a second rock, only to meet the same result. Whatever this invisible barrier was, it was impenetrable to his farm-sized projectiles. The creatures beneath the craft immediately responded to Edwards' rock-throwing efforts. They quickly retreated behind the tube-like structure at the base of the ship, seemingly using it as cover or as a way to re-enter the craft. Then, without any warning, the entire mushroom-shaped object shifted. It tilted towards him, then tilted again in another direction. On the third tilt, it lifted up from the ground, rising effortlessly into the sky. There was no visible propulsion, no sound of engines, nothing to explain how this massive object was moving. It simply floated upward silently, as if defying gravity itself, as Edward stood frozen in awe and perhaps a little bit of disbelief. The ship ascended at a breathtaking speed before leveling out and then darting off towards the northeast, disappearing in the direction of St. Elizabeth, Missouri. The entire experience, from the moment he noticed the silence on his farm to the departure of the strange craft, lasted all of about 10 minutes. But it was an experience that would undoubtedly stay with Claude Edwards for the remainder of his life. He had, by all accounts, chased off something with some rocks, only to be thwarted by an invisible wall and then witness their silent, rapid departure. Now, what follows makes this whole story even more intriguing to me. Edwards didn't really tell anyone about it, other than his immediate family. He was a private man, a farmer, not given to tall tales. But his brother, apparently, was insistent that this was something important, something that needed to be shared, no matter how it might make Claude look to the local community. Edwards, quite rightly, assumed that he would face ridicule for such an outlandish story. He had seen what he described as space penguins hanging out underneath a metallic mushroom in his field. This was not the sort of reputation a quiet farmer wanted in rural Missouri. However, his brother eventually contacted UFO investigator Ted Phillips and pleaded with Claude to speak to the man. After a fair amount of back and forth, Edwards finally agreed to it, but only on the condition that Phillips didn't reveal his identity publicly. Edwards did later give a couple of small interviews about the incident, but it seems he always requested to remain anonymous. The full account of his space penguin encounter was only published after Claude Edwards passed away, leaving behind a legacy that saw him nearly start an intergalactic war with, well, green penguins from beyond the stars. It's a story that, while undeniably bizarre, also carries a certain weight of sincerity in the way it was reported. And finally, folks, we come to our last tale for this evening, a truly palatable encounter, shall we say. This one takes us to the morning of April 18, 1961, in Eagle River, Wisconsin. Our witness was Joe Simonton, a 54-year-old plumber living just outside of town. Now, Joe's experience was unlike any other we've discussed tonight, and it involves something you might not typically associate with extraterrestrial visitors: breakfast. According to Joe, he was washing dishes around 11 a.m. when an unexpected noise caught his attention. He described the sound as reminiscent of screeching car tires rounding a sharp curve, a high-pitched whine that seemed out of place in the quiet of his morning. Looking outside, he was startled to see a metallic object descending from the sky, moving vertically, almost like an elevator in the air. His first thought was that something had happened to his roof, but the unfamiliar brightness of the object quickly told him otherwise. Rushing outside for a better look, Joe saw a gleaming, chrome-like craft hovering silently just above his driveway. The structure, he estimated, was roughly 30 feet wide and 12 feet high, and it resembled two inverted bowls pressed together, another classic flying saucer appearance. Without making any contact with the ground, the object remained suspended in the air, a silent and imposing presence just feet from his home. As Joe stood there watching, a hatch on the side of the craft opened, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. This being was no taller than 5 feet, and Joe noted that it had a dark complexion, which he likened to someone of Italian descent. Its face was smooth and hairless, and a tight-fitting cap covered its head. The being gestured to him, mimicking the act of drinking water, before handing him a metallic container with side handles. Joe looked into the being's eyes, but he said they were so penetrating, so intense, that he had to look away. There was something unnerving about its presence, yet for some reason, Joe didn't seem to be exactly afraid. More perplexed, perhaps. He took the container inside his home, filled it with water from his basement water pump, and returned it to the waiting figure. As he did so, he steadied himself against the craft with his other hand. Now, many people who have reported close encounters with UFOs have also described experiencing burns or other unusual effects from touching the surface of these objects. But when later asked about any possible burns or unusual sensations from touching the craft, Joe reported nothing out of the ordinary. The being took the container of water. Joe mentioned that he still struggled to look directly at it for any length of time, but when he did, he said it felt like the being was looking straight through him. He was convinced that it knew what he was thinking, not instinctively, but as though it could read his mind. Looking inside the craft through the open hatch, Joe noticed two additional figures. Both were clad in seamless, dark-hooded tunics. They appeared to be engaged in specific tasks. One was seated at what looked like a control panel, while the other was working over a heated grill-like device that produced smoke, but no visible flames. Curious about what they were cooking on this strange grill, Joe made a gesture as if he were eating, hoping to convey his interest. The beings seemed to understand him. In response, the being that had been standing in the doorway walked over to the grill, scooped up several small round objects from the heated surface, and handed them to Joe. He described these objects as resembling pancakes, but their texture was odd, hot and greasy, and perforated with small holes. Taking a bite, Joe found the taste to be, well, like eating cardboard. He later remarked that if this was their primary food source, it might explain their small stature. Before departing, the being in the hatch performed an unfamiliar gesture, touching its forehead momentarily before shutting the door to the craft. Joe, interpreting it as a salute, returned the motion, saying in a later interview, "What else was I supposed to do?" Once sealed, the hatch left no visible seam, as if it had never been there at all. Moments later, the craft rose silently about 20 feet into the air, tilted at a 45-degree angle, and then shot off at an incredible speed, leaving behind only a disturbed pine tree that swayed violently in its wake but showed no lasting damage. Left standing in his driveway with a handful of greasy, cardboard-tasting pancakes, Joe was understandably overwhelmed by what had just transpired. The bizarre nature of his story attracted both intense curiosity and, as you might expect, a fair amount of ridicule. Investigators were initially skeptical, but they noted that Simonton himself seemed genuinely sincere and had little to gain from fabricating such an outlandish account. He was, understandably, frustrated by the public's reaction, although he found it particularly odd that he was labeled as a chicken farmer when he only raised chickens as a side business. He was actually a plumber by trade, and he claimed that the notoriety of the pancake alien guy actually stopped him from getting work. Many people, it seemed, didn't want to hire the man who claimed to have eaten extraterrestrial breakfast. Interestingly, though, after the encounter, 23 of Joe's chickens died, all passing away quickly after the visitors had been to the farm. Joe kept a few of the strange pancakes and later showed them to Judge Franklin Carter, a local UFO enthusiast. Carter, intrigued by the claim, arranged for further analysis. One of the samples was eventually sent to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, a civilian UFO research group led by retired Marine Major Donald Kehoe. Though NICAP initially claimed that they did not analyze the sample, conflicting reports suggest it was tested, revealing it to be made of simple, earthly ingredients, primarily buckwheat flour. The NICAP group was seemingly hesitant to get too involved in this case, feeling it was too silly and that people wouldn't take it seriously. Despite the skepticism and the rather mundane analysis of the pancake, Joe wasn't alone in witnessing something that day. A local insurance agent, Savino Borgo, claimed to have seen an unidentified flying object in the area around the same time. Another resident, Phyllis Letty, along with her 3 children, also reported seeing the strange craft. Joe Simonton stuck to his story until the day he died, and it's a case that has resonated with many over the years for, I think, 2 major reasons. First, it is just such an unusual and frankly rather humorous account. Aliens offering pancakes? It's not your typical abduction scenario. And second, Joe himself just seemed so genuine. You can find interviews with him on YouTube from the time, and he just comes across as such a normal, everyday guy. It's hard to imagine him concocting such a bizarre tale. No one knows for certain what happened to Joe Simonton in his driveway that spring morning in 1961, but for many, it remains one of the strangest and most endearing UFO encounters ever recorded. A plumber gifted extraterrestrial pancakes, penguin-like visitors from beyond the stars, a winged Bigfoot soaring over the wilderness. Each tale more impossible than the last, and yet each told with a conviction that makes you wonder. So, there you have it, folks. A little dip into the stranger side of the UFO phenomenon. Are these stories the results of misidentifications wild imaginations fueled by late-night movies, or something that truly slinks just beyond the edges of our understanding? The next time you're alone on a quiet road, the next time you hear a strange noise in the night, remember there are those who swore that they saw something impossible. And maybe, just maybe, you are about to become one of those people. That's all for this entry into the tape library. I was genuinely planning on doing something a bit more serious on the ongoing disclosure movement, but I've had a bunch of these more unique cases that you all have asked me to tackle over the last year or so, and they just didn't really have enough meat to them for a whole episode on their own. So I thought combining a bunch of these wonderfully weird stories into one topic could be a fun way to tackle them. Thank you to everyone who suggested the likes of the Dade City Flowers and the Pancake Aliens. These strange little events are always favorites of mine to talk about. Plus, after a few really intense episodes in terms of writing and research, it was honestly quite fun to just listen to plumbers talking about aliens for a bit. Just want to add a quick note here, folks. The conversations going on at the moment surrounding UAPs are extremely interesting and, I believe, important. This episode was in no way intended to make light of that movement. This was just intended to be a fun exploration of some of the weirder stories that are out there, the ones that make you chuckle and scratch your head in equal measure. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please do let me know down in the comments. Click that like button and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help me out massively in bringing you more of these kinds of stories. I'm going to be taking a very short break now while I wrap up some work projects that exist outside of the tape library. So, the next episode will be the long-awaited Volume 8 of our scary story, To Fall Asleep to series. These are normally compilations of previous stories I've covered, but with minimal ads. But for this one, I'm hoping to record a handful of brand new stories to include as well. So hopefully, there will be something for everyone there. But never fear, I will be back in April with a brand new deep dive, which, if all goes to plan, will be another one that was requested by one of you, and it's a really creepy one. So stay tuned for that. If you want to support the show and help keep the tape library archives running, you can do that through YouTube memberships and Patreon. And now, it's time for those Patreon shout-outs. These are the wonderful people who keep the lights on in the tape library archives. List of Patreon supporters. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for your continued support. It means the world to me. And to you for making it to the end of this rather strange episode. Until next time, my friends, pleasant dreams, and maybe, just maybe, keep an eye on the sky. You never know what you might see.